Good afternoon in New York, good evening in Rwanda and Europe, and welcome whatever time of day or night for all who are joining us from all corners of the world. I'm Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for MultiGenerational Legacies of Trauma, ICMGLT for short. Thank you for joining our third webinar in our series on intergenerational legacies of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. 3. Participants were indeed encouraged to watch our two previous webinars in this series, which can be found at the ICMGLT website. This International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma webinar is held in partnership with the Genocide Survivors Foundation in observance of the 100 days of commemoration and national mourning period, April 7 to July 4, of Kwibuka 30, the 30th anniversary of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Rwandan authors, survivors, and children will share challenges and lessons they have learned about teaching, transmitting their traumatic legacy in ways that would have that would be preventive and reparative rather than traumatogenic. This webinar would not have happened without IMCLG Advisory Council member and chair of ICMGLT Rwanda Working Group, in addition to founding the Genocide Survivors Foundation, Jacqueline Mureketete's unique leadership and unfailing dedication. Your moderator, I am a clinical psychologist, traumatologist, victimologist, and psychohistorian. In the beginning 1970s, I co-founded in New York the group project for Holocaust survivors and their children, and since then have devoted much of my career to studying, treating, writing about, and preventing, as best I could, lifelong and multi-generational impacts of massive trauma, to ensuring victims' rights, to the rights of future generations, and to reparative justice. Those of you who are interested in any of these, they're all on our website and among our webinars. As a psychohistorian, I conceive of history not only as a set of dates and events, but as it is lived, and it shapes our identities and guides our choices and lives today. Our first speaker is Omar Ndizeye, teaching in Africana and Latinx Studies at SUNY Oneonta. Sorry. Ndizeye research focuses on genocide memorialization and cultural mourning in post-genocide Rwanda. Omar is a board member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. In 2012, he initiated the Legal and Counseling Helpline to facilitate survivors' mental health access. He authored Life and Death in Nyamata and created the Atlas of Genocide Against Tutsi map on ArcGIS. The second speaker of today's webinar is Henrietta Mutegraraba, Born in Butare province, Rwandan survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, she authored the memoir, By Any Means Necessary, Healing and Forgiveness After Genocide. A board member of One Tribe, a nonprofit peace-building organization serving in East and Central Africa. She founded the Million Lives Genocide Relief Fund, where she ardently advocates for truth-based justice, atrocity prevention, PTSD awareness, the healing potential of intentional unity, and community restoration. Our third speaker is Claver Irakoze, a genocide survivor, father, husband, researcher, author of That Child in Me in 2019, and transmitting memories in Rwanda from a survivor parent to the next generation in 2023, musician, songwriter, and founder of Umurage Parenting Center. Irakoze endeavors to lead cultural and family education in Rwanda and beyond, confronting the legacy of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. His steadfast dedication to intentional parenting seeks to cultivate empathy, tolerance, and peace in current and future generations. Akariza Lorette Anelli, today's last and youngest participant, was born after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Anelli authored Wet Under the Rainbow and Rebounce, that explores the profound impact of the genocide on younger generation through personal accounts of the struggles and hopes of post-genocide youth, as well as transgenerational resilience in Rwanda today. She is the Commissioner of Information, Documentation, and Memory at IERG, that you will say it in the right pronunciation, Association de l'Œuvre Escapée du Génocide, and founder of Rise and Live organization. As you see, we are going to learn a lot today. We have an hour and a half for the webinar. Each of our panelists will speak for about 10 minutes. Following an interchange among us, I will open the floor to questions or brief comments from the virtual audience. We will then conclude with last words. Please use the chat function, and we'll do our best to respond to as many as we can. Feel free to direct your question to a particular panelist or to the full panel. I now have the profound pleasure to offer the screen to Omar. Omar, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. El Daniel, for your very wonderful introduction, and for everyone you worked with to organize this Zoom panel discussion. I'm deeply honored to be here as well with other fellow survivors and their descendant writers to share insights on intergenerational memorization process. When Professor Stephen Wolf from Weber State University in Utah and I started a discussion about writing an article on Nyamata Genocide Memorial, I was interested in telling a story. A detailed story of what happened in 2 days massacres at this former Catholic church in 1994. Stories of cows, people, hunger, and cruel death at this atrocity site was an additional contribution I wanted to add to the existing human remains, their deteriorating clothes, victims, artifacts, and graveyards where more than 10,000 Tutsis victims are buried. But again, as someone who was with them, I wanted this article also to respond to these questions. To the questions like, who are they? Where were they coming from? Who killed them and how? I must also admit that places like Nyamata embody the full of symbolism for both local and Rwanda's collective memory. While for me, Nyamata Genocide Memorial is a graveyard and a trusty site, and a place of where cows were killed, a place where Tutsi men died trying to protect women and children. To others, like a Rwandan French author, Scholastique Mukasonga, who was deported to Bugesera in 1960s, Nyamata may also be a reminder of the deportation and persecution of Tutsis since 1959. It is therefore stories that define a place. Stories turn a place into what Pierre Nora called lieu de mémoire, which means a site of memory. Stories are connectors of generations and they perpetuate memory representation while humanizing victims of genocide. As Carl Wicken, a known American who stayed in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide against Tutsi, wrote in his book, I'm Not Living, when the figures involving the loss of life begin to enter into thousands and thousands, 100,000, they quickly become cold statistics that often blind us more than the informers. But when we look at the individual lives through stories, we find ourselves informed, he added. What Carl reminds us in this short passage of his book is that the stories matter and knowing the truth about the genocide. But again, I argue that genocide is multidimensional in nature, which means that it goes beyond the loss of life, memory representation, to include triggers from places of atrocities and the psychological effects associated to this dark past. As Mark Morin wrote in his book, it didn't start with you. Fragments of memory dispersed in image, body sensations, and words are stored in our unconscious, and they can become activated later by anything even remotely reminiscent of the original experience. Once they are triggered, it is as if an invisible rewind button has been pressed, causing a random aspect of original trauma in our day-to-day lives. In the context of post-genocide Rwanda, we note from Mark Warren's words that every memorial, atrocity site, hill, trees, forests, plantations like sorghum or bananas, smear swamps, to name few, are triggers which regularly reactivate traumatic memories at any time. In this reflection on international legacies of memory, I've put my emphasis on places, more specific atrocity sites. I mean places where Tutsis were killed and sometimes buried. In my research on sites of memory of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda, I have identified the 334 sites where Tutsis had gone seeking refuge and were killed there. I had presented 269 among them on an interactive map. One should note that among these 334 sites of memory, 127 were churches and one mosque, while the other 207 were government offices, health facilities, factories, military barracks, schools, and a small island inside the Lake Kivu. However, this does not mean that the list is exhaustive. Some victims were killed on hills, marshes, mine shafts, forests, bushes, and other unidentified places. In some cases, some of the victims' bodies couldn't be found for a proper burial or floated through the rivers and reached neighboring countries, Tanzania and Uganda, through Lake Akagera and Lake Victoria. Most of these victims are still buried in those two countries, Tanzania and Uganda. Some survivors travel every year to these two countries to remember these victims of genocide. As Verena demonstrated, the genocidaires not always took the time to collect all human remains and bury them in mass graves, leaving the country right littered with thousands of decayed bodies. Although burying in mass graves was not a cultural practice before the genocide, there was no choice under these conditions, which explains the practice of burying some victims in their homes, while others were buried in mass graves after the genocide. For Rachel Ibrek, participation of Rwandan genocide survivors in memorialization was a reaction to genocide. She added that it allows out of loss and trauma and become part of their everyday existence. Additional to these two reasons of trauma and loss, I always add the cultural customs and obligations, because in most cultures, decent burial is part of life cycle. Although in the early years, genocide survivors were supported by their community neighbors, government of Rwanda, and different non-government organizations in the process of burying their relatives killed during the genocide. Since 2004, after the creation of the Kigali Genocide Memorial, we are observing a shift in both policies, but also in the memory actors' roles. Many activities were institutionalized throughout this process. Currently, memorials are classified into 4 categories. These include the 4 memorials listed on the UNESCO World Heritage list: national memorials managed by Ministry of Unity and Civic Education, district memorials, and sector memorials. I agree with Anarisa's assertion that physical form of heritage sites reflect global and local discourses. Memorials, therefore, not only perpetuate the memory of the absent, but also immortalize this dark past across generations. Let me conclude by echoing William Faulkner's timeless words. The past is never dead. It's not even the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Omar. So much to think about. And you bring me personally many of the memories of when the memorials were just being built, and all of the questions that you're still asking and attempting to address. Thank you. Henriette, the floor is yours, or the screen more. Please unmute.
Greetings to all of you, those in Rwanda, those in the US, and all over the world. Thank you, Dr. Danielle and your team for putting together this amazing webinar. Today, I'm really, really thankful for this important space where survivors of genocide can share our stories. It is good to know our voices have a value to you and that you welcome our stories and insight. Perhaps most of all, I am grateful for you to invite us with the intent that our stories may educate with a story like ours, that it is my prayer that and hope that our stories will compel us all to think and live differently. So today I will be sharing challenges women survivors of genocide against the Tutsi faces during genocide and after genocide that can affect our children, because I am a mother too. But before I share with you how those challenges look like for some of us here and those watching, I'd love to talk about how a typical Rwandan family structure looks like. It often follows a pattern of extended families and strong community ties. There is a head of the household, typically the father or an elderly male members of family serve as the head of the household. They hold authority and are responsible for decision-making within the families. They protect the whole family, making sure all is well within the family. They support emotionally and financially. And then comes the spouse partner or partner. The head of the household is usually married or in a long-term partnership. The spouse play a significant role in managing the household and raising children. Mothers are the primary caretaker of the children. And then there's children, of course. Families typically consist of biological children, although adoption and fostering are also common in our family and our culture, of course, because of genocide. Many children were left without a parents, not even one parent or relatives who will survive. They found themselves in stranger families or in neighbor, whoever wanted to take them in and raise them. So children are highly valued and expected to contribute to their families' well-being as they grow older. And then comes, we cannot ignore the importance of extended families. The Rwandan families often includes extended families, big families. We love our neighbors and families and relatives, members such as grandparents, aunties, uncles, and cousins. Those relatives may live nearby within this or the same household, providing support and guidance to one another. But because of the genocide, the 1994 genocide, that structure was gone. Families were destroyed. Children were left without mothers or any siblings or anybody they know, left alone with no hope. And they couldn't see how the future would look like for us and for us, including the people here. Some of us here lost everybody during genocide. So during genocide in Rwanda and all the propaganda leading up to the genocide, they made sure that men were killed. That were the first target. Killing Tutsi male held a symbolic importance for the genocidal ideology, as they represent the continuation of Tutsi lineage and identity. By eliminating Tutsi males, the perpetrators aimed to eradicate Tutsi, make sure that the new generation, and it was clear in the propaganda that they wanted to make sure that the new generation will ask how a Tutsi person looks like. They wanted us all dead and gone. So many women survivors expected to experience the loss of their spouse, children, and extended family members during the genocide. The absence of family support structure have had a profound effects on children's emotional well-being and development. Women were left widowed and without access to resources, making it challenging for them to provide for their children basic needs. Economic instability can lead to food insecurity, limited access to education and healthcare, and increase of vulnerability to exploitation. So the effect of rape as well. As we know, during the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, the rape was profound and devastating. It results in a severe physical and psychological trauma for the survivors, leading to long-term consequences such as unwanted pregnancy, sexual transmission infection, stigma, and shame. More than 250,000, between 250,000 and 300,000 were raped, and hundreds and hundreds of children were born of rape. So those women survivors may face social stigma, of course, and isolation with their communities, particularly if they were victims of sexual violence, or if their ethnicity associated with the genocide. So this isolation can create barriers for accessing support network and the services for themselves and their children. During my time at the Kigali Genocide Memorial Center, where I worked I had the privilege to work with survivors of genocide for 4 years. And I faced, it was the very first time that I was exposed to many people who were traumatized. So many traumatized at the same time, flashbacks at the center, people running all over the place. In that time, there was not enough psychologists or therapists or a place available for them so we can take them for healing. And everybody was trained, at least for a short training for 1 week, to know how at least to touch those people, just what kind of touch you can give to them. And I met this young lady. She was very young. When genocide happened, she was only a few months. Her father was killed. Her twin sister was killed. And everybody in her family was gone except her mother, who survived, and she was HIV positive. She grew up watching her mom going to the doctors every week, taking a medication, and sometimes no access to food, which was making her even sicker and sicker. She grew up with a fear. So we became friends. After a few visits, that was her counselor, and she started sharing her fear. What was her fear? Her fear was that her mother is not gonna live. Her fear was that her mother was not going to see her graduating from high school. So there are cases like that, so many cases like that in our country, in our families, in our communities, where trauma is being transmitted, where children have no hope to see their mother, have no hope so that their mother that will see them either get married or graduating from universities. So in intergenerational trauma, children of genocide survivors may inherit the psychological and emotional trauma experienced by their parents, even if they did not directly witness the atrocities. This intergenerational trauma transmission of trauma can impact children's mental health, behavior, and relationships, perpetuating cycles of suffering across generations. So to conclude, addressing those challenges requires comprehensive support system that prioritize the holistic well-being of women survivors and their children. These include access to mental health services, economic empowerment initiatives, community-based support network, and legal assistance to ensure justice and accountability by addressing the needs of women survivors. We can create a more resilient and compassionate society for future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Henriette, for so eloquently and so sensitively describing both the burden and the dynamics and the need. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Claver from women and mothers to father. Please unmute. This is wonderful that you'll focus on the fathers, indeed. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Danielle, and everyone who is following online. It is truly an honor to have this platform to share insights drawn from our lived experiences as survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Many thanks to Omar and Harriet for your contributions. You kind of touched on many aspects of my presentation. Therefore, I'll be brief to allow ample time for interaction. My talk today is titled Raising Rwanda's Next Generation. And I approach this subject not only as a genocide survivor and a memory worker, but also as a parent and above all, as a father, navigating the complexities of post-genocide realities while raising my own children. So it's kind of an add-on to what Harriet has just shared. Post-genocide Rwanda presents countless challenges in nurturing the next generation, many of which linked with the consequences of the genocide against the Tutsi. And as Omar put, that genocide goes beyond the loss of innocent lives. The fabric of Rwandan society was torn apart. And worse for us was to live to see neighbors turning against neighbors, parents turning against their own children, because maybe the mom or the dad was Tutsi. This is among many sad realities of the genocide against the Tutsi. On the other hand, as Harriet also mentioned, rape wielded as a weapon of destruction has left permanent scars, inflicting physical and emotional trauma and infecting many women with HIV. Some survivors now raise children born of perpetrators in the context of rape, as I was saying, a stark reminder of the horrors endured. As survivors who witnessed the unspeakable atrocities at a tender age, the memories haunt us. We strive for a normal life while grappling with the trauma engraved into our subconscious. Parenting in post-genocide Rwanda demands courage, as family dynamics have been irrevocably changed. This was pretty much discussed in Harriet's presentation, so I will not again repeat myself. The absence of loved ones reshapes
It's
our
okay
identity.
Claver, forgive me, it's okay to repeat. Some of our audience, old friends, some of our audience are hearing this for the first time. So it's okay to repeat. They're learning, and we are all learning, and we are all extremely thankful for listening to each one of you.
Thank you, thank you. I was saying that parenting in post-genocide Rwanda demands courage as family dynamics have changed. The absence of loved ones reshapes our identities, forcing us to confront a painful past for the sake of our children's future. The loss of our parents, our role models, drives us into adulthood prematurely, leaving us to navigate life's complexities without guidance. Even recalling about cherished moments with our parents reopens old wounds, yet our shared history is essential to our identity and in shaping identity of descendants. My professional career as a memory worker at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, where Harriet also worked, and the Aegis Trust has exposed me to the struggles of parents and educators and young people who come to the memorial to learn about the past, and also parents and teachers who seek to understand how they can approach this very complicated subject and disclose, explain to the new generation what really happened. So in this context, I was encouraged by my career at the memorial to understand how modern parents are raising their children amidst the enduring shadows of history. My book with Caroline Williamson Sinaro, Transmitting Memories in Rwanda from a Survivor Parent to the Next Generation, is a reflection of the passion I have to support parents. I believe that embracing our past, facing it, and ultimately making peace with it is very essential. By doing so, we empower ourselves to engage the next generation in constructive dialogue, equipping them to navigate post-genocide realities with compassion and resilience. However, this journey is not and will never be linear. Taking into consideration Rwanda today, where 65.3% of Rwandans are 30 years and below, which gives us more than 8.5 million Rwandans out of 13 million, 0.2, who do not have any direct memory of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. This explains the heavy responsibility parents have in raising the next generation, because these young people want to understand what happened. And considering the life we live in post-genocide, where between April and July, we take 100 days for commemorating the genocide, and many Kwibuka events are organized across the country, where stories of the past, testimonies, not only from survivors, but also from perpetrators are shared. The young generation really needs to understand what happened from the very close corner, which is the family. But for many parents, looking back, disclosing the past is very, very traumatic, not only for survivors, but also I can imagine those who come from perpetrators' families, those of my age, I was 11, trying to recall memories of their parents, maybe bring back a father or a mother who wielded a machete and went to kill. How will be courageous enough to disclose such traumatic past, and shameful on another side? Many parents who came to the memorial, and teachers indeed, mentioned lack of words in explaining the past, especially to young children. And from that very complex situation, an inspiration came to write a children's book, That Child Is Me, which tries to convey memories of the past in a child-friendly manner, bearing in mind that when we disclose our memories of the past to shape new generations' identity, we don't have necessarily to start with the traumatic events, but rather start with blissful memories, bring back the images of people we lost, talk about who they were and their aspirations before we go into the hardship. So children's book, That Child Is Me, was a way of trying to share very light words that parents can emulate while discussing the past in their homes. But as I said again, the journey is not linear because we have so many unworked trauma from both sides, survivors and non-survivors. Yet home is where we learn these values, values of compassion, empathy, tolerance, and indeed respect to human being. Again, this shows how young Rwandan the percentage I was talking about shows how young Rwandan population is. If you take those who are 35 and below, we go all the way up to 75%, and that is close to 10 million. And these are young parents raising the next generation who have no guidance, no reference. And many of these parents opt for silence. But this silence is too loud because as we move around the country, we have memorials, we have site of killings, we have genocide landmarks that really keep reminding us of that hard past. In conclusion, in our book with Caroline Williamson Sinaro, we proposed 5 principles that parents can try to emulate to navigate these complexities. And if you allow, I can share the screen to talk about these 5 as I conclude. The first one, we recognize that parenting should include the full participation of all family members. Here, I talk about the father, the mother, but also children coming into this conversation. This should not be a conversation of a father or a mom alone, because everyone has his own experience. Principle 2 is recognizing that this past we talk about is very heavy on us. Therefore, before we disclose what we have to disclose, let us put on our own oxygen mask first. This means let us look back, embrace this past, reconcile with it, make peace with it, and from there, we get the power of sharing the past with the new generation. The third one is about laying strong foundations. Many parents fear to disclose, to share, to have open conversation in their homes with their children. Yet, at school, children learn about the 1994 genocide right from grade 5 in primary. But what they don't learn is personal stories of their parents, of their families. Therefore, we should trust them and bring them on board early enough to start this journey together. The fourth principle is about trusting children with the truth. And here I refer to Akariza, who is with us today. He started writing about what her parents lived through. And that is a way of perpetuating the memory and making sure that the new generation is also responsible with us in this journey. Lastly, we have to recognize that it takes a village to raise a child. Therefore, even though community life changed because of the genocide, which destroyed trust among people, but again, we have to trust the community in bringing our children by supporting parents across communities to know and understand the past, but also be resilient enough to take the courage to shape young minds with compassion and resilience. As I conclude, I would like to quote a Spanish philosopher, George Santayana, who once said that a child educated only at school is an uneducated child. This reminds us of the extensive role and overwhelming responsibility parents have in raising the next generation. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to exploring this topic further with you through your questions and comments. Thank you.
So sorry. Thank you very much, Claver. As we listen to our panelists, we see that memory is private as well as public. It's political as well as social, as well as personal. There are so many dimensions that we are illuminating here today or pointing to for our discussions. And between parents and children, children and parents, children and teachers, etc. Such a rich panel. And we will only gain so much more even than now by listening to Anneli. One of the sayings is that from the mouth of babes, and we listen to the children's voice. Anneli, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel, for this, for all of these participants. I can see there are many. So sharing these testimonies, this historical background of genocide against the Tutsi, it's shedding the light all over the world. And thank you for having me here as a voice of the second generation, the post-genocide generation. It's a lot to us, and to our parents. Seeing us here means a lot to them. I will start by what Clever told us, that raising a child requires a village. So I am from the survivors family. I was born after the genocide against the Tutsi, right after. So as Clever told us, we were raised in that village of people who were from a traumatic event like genocide. They were healing, they were going through a lot at the same time, developing themselves and the country at the same time. And the memory transmission we're talking about now wasn't a discussion by then. It wasn't a public discussion because no one would think that it was supposed to share a testimony or what a long journey you went through in 1994. So the silence was all over. And yet, as Clever said, as Harriet said, the silence meant a lot because you would see all of what Omar told us. You would see the memorial sites. You would see people crying, and you wouldn't know what was it about. So it was many of my generation faced psychological distress from the silence, first of all, because there were not many people, many parents talking about genocide against the Tutsi as it is supposed to be said. They would cross a little bit of what they've been through, but not that long journey. So after all, when you start to understand what your parents, your close ones, Clever said it as it is, our parents are our heroes, our role models. So everything about them means a lot to us. So understanding what genocide was to them set many traumatic ideas in our head, like anxiety, depression. Some would even face nightmares. Talking about all these challenges as a post-genocide child, I would go through my book. It is called Wait Under the Rainbow. By its title itself, you would understand that, because I think the post-genocide generation were wet under the rainbow, were wet under the cover of their parents who were healing. Their healing journey started right after their parents. For some, because even some parents now are going through the way of healing. We understand that it's a journey. It's also a journey to the second generation children. Yes, in Wet Under the Rainbow, I liked that I wrote it without a general idea of what people were going through, my generation. But after writing Wait Under the Rainbow, I've seen the clear idea of how big and how impactful the idea of transgenerational trauma was. Because after writing the stories of my colleagues, my nearby colleagues, I understood the feedback of many of my mates, my generation, telling me how visible and how vivid the transgenerational trauma is in their lives. It was a good thing to shed the light on, because if you can see something, then you can cure it. They took themselves as those people who couldn't seek for the psychological support or the therapy, because they thought it was meant for their parents. But after the Wait Under the Rainbow, to my close ones, we shed the light on that, clear that we also had problems, and it was normal. It was very good. And I think for them to see this, their mate having a voice in this webinar would even mean more to them, that they have something to say. They've faced the consequences even though they were not born yet. And yes, they have to do something about that. Saying that they have to do something about that, I later on wrote Rebounce. It's transgenerational resilience. I think if we say about the challenge, we won't leave behind how we've inherited the resilience from our parents, the survivors. After going through all that in these past 30 years, we've learned a lot from them, because they've been those heroes that we say, those heroes that we're talking about. They raised us as orphans, but yet gave us love, kindness, nurture us into good women and men. Yet they didn't have anyone to teach them, to correct them, or to run through for advice. I think it is a big deal to many people to do something as parenting without an example, because some were orphans at a young age. Being raised by those orphans from the genocide against the Tutsi was a very good thing to inherit resilience. And that's why after hearing those stories from my age mates, I understood resilience from their passage. I understood how their parents woke up after a tragic moment like genocide against the Tutsi and raised them into people they were. Even seeking about therapy or psychological ideas or searching around, it was the energy of vindication. After all, they were educated from those parents. The parents provided all that they could by then. So in Rebounce, we can see successful stories from survivors, because even though it was not told by a survivor saying a resilient story, but being said by me, a child from survivors, would also mean something to the world, something to the survivors, that after all, their child have seen something in them, apart from the tears, the pain that they can see in their eyes, even after these 30 years. We can even see the resilience, their strong eyes to wake up every day, to write the books, because it's a long journey also to write what you've been through in a book, because you even reflect more to the journey you were in at the time. They're having initiatives all around Rwanda, diaspora of Rwanda, and all. So that's a very good thing of Rebounce that is said by a post-genocide child. So the challenge of the second generation are all in that silence and in that pain and in that inheritance from the society in general, the village that we're raised in, and the parents. But again, that's the source of our strength and our resilience at the same time. I think we will discuss more throughout the discussion with the audience. And again, thank you very much. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Clever and Harriet and Dr. Daniel, because with them, I think the memory will be transmitted clearly in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelly. With your help and with your love, the memory will be transmitted lovingly and respectfully. And this is, thank you. This is time for our panel to discuss with each other and maybe to ask each other questions, so you can unmute, please. Claire, Anneli, Henriette, Omar, please unmute. One of the issues I wanted to ask all of you, because it arose in Cariza's. I know you prefer the second name, right? I feel close to you, so I call you by first names if it's okay with you. So, Anneli mentioned the response of the readers to her book, all of your authors, and what can you tell us about the response of readers to your books, please? Would you share that aspect? Because, of course, your books are part of the attempt to dissipate the conspiracy of silence, right? To open the discussion, to find the words to help people speak by your eloquent writing. And thank you, Jacqueline, for putting the names of all the books in the chat. And we need all of them in our library. So please, authors, you know where to send them. But because you are courageous in opening up the discussion by publishing your books, what have you learned from the response of audiences, of the readers? What do you think? Who would like to pick it up first? Omar, I think you already have your beautiful smile on, which means you're ready to speak. Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Daniel, thank you so much. That's a very wonderful question. And I want to thank my colleagues here, Kaliza, Harriet, and the Lakoze also for eloquently speaking from their work they are doing, but also from on this topic we are talking about. So in responding to that question, let me share just a small story. Of recent, an association in Canada called the Humura, it's a survivors organization, organized a book review of where descendants of genocide survivors led 30 memoirs of genocide survivors. And it was amazing. A young man called Prince led, picked up my books. He chose to read my book for one reason, because his mother is originating from Nyamata, Mugesera. And my book happened to be called Life and Death in Nyamata. So he was curious to know what happened in Nyamata, especially that most of the time the silence that Clever and Anneli mentioned here is across all survivors' families. Prince's family live in Canada, but he had, at his young age, there are questions he had about his parents, but he had never had the courage, first of all, to ask them to his parents. But his parents also were never open up to allow him to discuss those questions. So when he got this opportunity of reading Survivor's Memoir, then he picked up my book. Then during that presentation, he was very brief. He said, by reading your book, all questions I had about my mother were responded. I got responses about my mother from your book because I got to know the hills, the places where she was born, even if I have never been there. So which means that for what complicate young generations, the second generation, is to not have an image, is to search, is that a perpetual search of an image of what the genocide is about, of what that situation was about, of that horror was about, of that areas. They hear names, sometimes they don't hear names. So what I learned from planes is that creating an image for children help them to overcome the identity crisis. And I'm assuming that most of the children have this question as well. So I learned that from my book then, that by mentioning names of hills, names of people, probably helped a lot of people more than planes. And of course, I got a lot of very good feedbacks, but the Prince's one was very touching because it responded to the reason why I wrote the book, which was to perpetuate names of the people, including my father and my young brother I had lost during the genocide.
What about you, Henriette? What have you, and Omar, I want to commend you for always sharing your talks and the responses at LinkedIn. You're a wonderful teacher, not just to Rwandans, but to everyone. Henriette, please. What have you learned from your readers?
Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Daniel and Omar, Akariza, Cleva, and everybody listening today. I am just very inspired to see the smile around this, whatever we're doing now. And I'm pretty sure even the audience is smiling as well, at the same time learning from us. So when I wrote my book, I wanted to make sure that this is a book for my family, of course, because like we're talking about intergenerational trauma and young people and how current survivors of genocide, there's a lot that you cannot always share with the families. And our stories are very painful. And it's just sometimes hard to sit and talk to your niece or your daughter. It's better to write it and give them a book and say, go deal with it. That's another kind of trauma. So when I was writing my book, I grew up in a family where my grandpa, my whole family went through the genocide in '59 and other years where Tutsi were oppressed and killed and forced migration. So I grew up in those families. And after genocide, when my whole family was killed, I felt guilty that I wasn't paying attention to what they went through, the pain, the question that I never asked. So it was making me so guilty to the point I thought, let me write so that my children will never go through the same. A lot of unanswered questions. But also I wrote a book for leaders, politicians. It wasn't just only my family. I wanted them to know that there was a mistake done by our government, that the world turned a blind eye when we were suffering during genocide, that the international community did nothing to come and help us. So my leaders are not only survivors, it's the leaders, it's the people from all over the world. And there is always good feedback. It's church leaders, because as Omar said, we have a lot of people thought they're gonna be safe when they sought refuge in churches and they were killed inside the churches. We have a lot of churches that now memorialize. So it was writing for all of those people, making sure that even if it took me years to dig down those memories and write, but I wanted to make sure that everybody have their passion of education and what went through and advocacy. So it's very inspiring to see the feedback from church leaders, feedback from even my families. Not long ago, I received a beautiful letter from a young child who was adopted by American family. She was from Mexico, and she was abused when she was young. Her family abandoned her, and she read my book, and she wrote me this beautiful letter because my book talks about forgiveness as well. And she would never in a million years have thought to forgive her mother. But after reading my book, she sent me a letter telling me how much she appreciated the work that I did and how she was able to forgive her mother. And those stories are always inspiring. Or one time when I went to speak somewhere, and it was a big audience in the church, and one of the church leaders came to me and started to repent and telling me the issue that was happening between the churches, and she was open to tell me, this is gone, I'm gonna clean this, it's gonna be okay. Your story is inspiring. You have so much power and a voice to, sharing how one can forgive after horrific events like the one you went through.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. When I was laying out some of the dimensions earlier, I did not include the church. And of course, you brought it in. Thank you. Of course, so important. There's so much to discuss. I mean, I'm like, we need a whole weekend seminar together.
Yeah, right.
And Jacqueline knows, everybody knows, one of my dreams is to have, again, an international meeting of survivors and their children to discuss these issues and share and learn from each other. Some of you don't know because you were too young, but in 2001, we had a meeting in Kigali. We had the international meeting of all genocide survivors. I had the honor of being the international chair. And anyone from President Kagame through everybody was there. It was extraordinary, and we had survivors of the Holocaust, both from United States, Europe, and Israel, and indigenous people, both from the United States and Australia. We had Bosnia survivors. We had Cambodia. We had it was to me personally, it was the most meaningful meeting I've ever had the honor to attend and participate in. And I think it's time to do the next one. So if not in Kigali next time, maybe we'll find another. Unfortunately, the world keeps bringing us new places. But I want to throw it out as the idea to everyone all the time. Hopefully that the universe will say, oh, yes, here, let's
So,
do
Dr.
it.
Danielle, can I say something?
Oh, I'm throwing it at all of you. I know among all the brilliance here, in this, even in this room, we'll find a way, I'm sure. At any rate, Claver, would you like to make any comment or question or response to what I brought up? You already had that. One of the, in the chat, a mother shared with you that her daughter is reading your book. That's amazing.
That is very amazing, very encouraging. And I want to start with that book for children. One of the very touching feedback I've ever got was from a 12-year girl who read the book, and we met a few weeks later after the book was published. And when I asked her about what she learned or what she liked about the book, she responded, "I'm glad you survived to tell this story." And that was very touching,
Wow.
very, very, very emotional. And this tells you the power of sharing these stories.
Yeah.
And my conviction is that when we write to preserve the memory, we write to share, we write to inspire, but above all, we also write to educate. Through these books, through the conversation we host, talking about the book we write, people get to learn, and we also get inspired to work on many more books.
Exactly.
So for me, this is it's a journey filled with many rewarding moments when you come across to people who are interested in what we do.
This is very interesting. Thank you. And Jacqueline just wrote here, also, I want to share the website to Trauma Healing Conference that Henriette is leading at the planning of this August in Houston. Wonderful. I know I will be there in Houston, Texas, and I can't wait to be with you in person. Please visit the website. Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline. And indeed, Anneli, any questions or any to anyone else, any comment to this older generation? Near me, you're all young. So for me, you're just older than Anneli. Go ahead, Anneli. Whoops, are you frozen? Oh, come on. Okay, when you unfreeze, we want to, oh, here you are. You're with us again?
Yes, yes.
Wonderful.
Okay. I can't add much from the feedback of my readers. What I can say is that
No, just for the panel, anything that you would like to note or to ask about in the panel discussion. You just gave me a wonderful question, but we can ask anything else too.
Okay, let me first say that it wasn't that easy for me to say something that no one have said about it before in a book, to voice up that transgenerational trauma in Rwanda in a book. So it was like to highlight it. It wasn't that easy to answer those questions. Why would you say that? After all, we are not all healed. But again, it was just a good starting up to open up the conversation between my mates to talk about how they can heal themselves from those trauma. I don't have a question to the speakers. I would love to continue to hear more about their parenting in this era, because it's even
You're freezing again. Let me pick up on maybe the idea that you meant to say, and to the two parents and the wise person near them. What difficulty did you experience right before? What happened inside right before you were about to share your story? What went through your mind or heart or body?
Yes, the question
I would like to answer that question by I think when you asked us what was the feedback, there is one of the special feedback I got from I visited the school in Northampton, and I got these two young girls who came to me and said, one of them said, I wanted to work on the Holocaust. but I didn't know that this is something I can have as a career in life. But reading your book and having you speaking here, now I know that I can work on survivors, Holocaust survivors' memoirs, and I'm going to continue that in my studies. That was a very encouraging feedback I got, which shows that the book we write inspired generations from different backgrounds as well.
Absolutely.
And they contributed to the memorization also of other genocides as well, including the Holocaust. As that young lady was her passion. And what I learned by interacting with people like her is that this space, Dr. Yael and your colleagues prepared, is what young people need. Young people need a space, especially space that discuss on genocide. For academicians who are here, I'm going to ask them to forgive me, but I'm asking everyone to create spaces for young people, and for them to share, but also to meet with survivors and their people like Neri of their generations, to learn from each other. So to create another generation of conscious young people who are men and women of tomorrow. So for your question, I think the difficulties I experienced, there are two. First of all, is that writing a memoir, it's kind of reliving the life of genocide.
Right.
It's reliving those moments. I think I had to spend some sleepless nights because of some of the moments I would recall at the time, but also the fear that not everyone is able to carry the burden I had in my heart. Like the stories I had, I would always try to moderate words. I remember one of my professor of creative education, creative writing. She was good, and she was my friend. She told me, like, I wish you could have provided a lot of details in your book. And I'm like, after meeting you, now I can write another book of mine with a lot of details, because that time I didn't have that courage. And I thought that, for example, detailing everything that I saw in the church would be traumatizing to any reader. So it is that fear that my story can re-traumatize people, trying to moderate, to find exact words of telling my story. But also the second challenge is a challenge that many survivors from Rwanda in particular face, especially in the publishing in this part of the world. I mean, in many publishing houses don't find these stories as interesting. Because after I published my book, different survivors came to me, and one of them asked me help to find a publisher. And the publisher, I connected her to write her book, to publish her book. Asked her to turn her non-fiction story into fictional story. And that was a very psychological wounding to her. But also, while it's a challenge, we also have people of good heart as well. I think about, for example, someone Catherine Edson, who helped me to publish my book, to find a publisher. For example, we do have a Shidanska. She's here. She's a Rwandan living in Germany. who help many survivors to publish their books. I think ArcGIS is publishing with her as well. And we have you, Danielle, who is organizing this webinar. And I want to thank you because of that conference you mentioned, which called Life and Death of 2000, because it shaped memory. As someone who is working on memorization, I can see a lot of your contribution. Many survivors don't know your contribution because that conference, after that conference, there was a lot of structures, but I know that those structures came from that conference. And I want to thank you in front of other survivors because you gave a shape, memorization of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi, of course, working with other people you worked with at the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Claver or Henriette, do you want to say anything, or should we open it up to, I would like Jacqueline, to maybe to say something, and Mathilde, who is also on our advisory council. But there's one question that keeps returning among the questions. So before I put Jacqueline and Mathilde, are you still here? I don't have my glasses. This is no fun. So Jacqueline, darling, before you speak, I would just like to say there are several questions from Shingiro Mabel, who is asking about writing or how to publish, and maybe if you can recommend courses for writing, so others can take you as a model. Anybody can speak very briefly to that, because I do want, indeed, Jacqueline is right. We have Violetta, who asked very important questions about rape victims and their particular journey of shame in this society as well as in others. So how about, Jacqueline, why won't you take 2 minutes at most, okay? And then we open up to everybody. Go ahead, my dear Jacqueline, without whom this would not have happened, everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Daniele. I actually don't have much to say. I think our speakers have done an amazing job in speaking about this critically important topic. So all I can emphasize is how critical this conversation is. It's been 30 years since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, as you heard. And I feel that this year in particular, trauma healing, mental health has become a critical concern for survivors, for Rwandan generally. And that is to be expected, because you always hear that in the aftermath of genocide and other mass atrocity crimes, survivors, people, they are focused initially on basic needs, on housing and getting the food to the table. And it's only later that survivors have the opportunity to start processing their trauma, to start thinking about how we can share our experiences with our children in a way that minimizes the trauma transmission. So this is a timely conversation, because we are witnessing, as you heard, a lot of mental health issues, not only with survivors, but with children of survivors. I have many friends who tell me that their children, who are teenagers now, have started having nightmares of being chased by machete-bearing men. These are children who never lived through the genocide. I have two young children. One is 7, one is 3, and the 7-year-old, just at the early age of 5, she started asking me, of course. She noticed that my parents were not allowed, that I did not have siblings. So children are asking these questions, and it's really important that parents have the skills and the resources to know how we can convey our history. This is why I'm very thankful that, Karaveri wrote his books about how parents can share our history, again, while minimizing the transmission of trauma. I'm thankful for the books that Kariza has written, highlighting the trauma that is present in young people, and legitimizing that pain and trauma, because this is another crisis, as I said, that we're facing within young people born after the genocide. A lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for us to have this conversation, because we have to realize that part of preventing genocide is making sure that we are able to heal as individuals, as families, because you cannot have a healed community, a healed country with unhealed individuals and unhealed families. So I want to thank each of the speakers for your contribution. And I encourage everybody in the audience to read their books, and I encourage everybody who can join us for the continuation of this conversation at our conference that I mentioned in a chat that will take place in Texas. Hopefully Henriette is going to talk a little bit more about later. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Daniele, for providing this platform, not only for survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, but all the webinars that the center has been putting on about the Holocaust, about Ukraine, about Native Americans, because as I always say, genocide is a crime against humanity. And wherever it happens, we have to speak up, and we have to be participants in post-genocide rebuilding. That is a critical part of prevention, as I said. So thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, and I wanted to thank you, Jacqueline. What Jacqueline didn't mention, which I'm going to, is as I said at the beginning, this is the 3rd webinar on intergenerational transmission of trauma. The others focused on particular issues. So please, for those of you who are truly interested, listen to them. They are all on our website. Learn. Donatilla left. I wanted her to say a few words, but she's always busy and has to do the next thing. And but I wanted to shed light on one very wise comment. You all made very wise comments, but Claver, when you gave your concluding recommendations, you said to share it with the whole family. And there's a great wisdom in that, because it doesn't only imply to traumatize the whole family, but it also acknowledges the protective structure. The family is a protective structure, right? When you share, you're also, even without saying it, you're saying this family is capable of meeting this challenge. So I just wanted to underscore that. It's a very wise, very wise issue for us to remember. I also want to underscore, to quote here, Felix Rabukwisi comment. He says the political dimension of genocide memorial is an interesting barrier as well for low-weight countries like Rwanda. Your support is important to teach the value of expression. I have the feeling that at some point we will have to have a webinar on the political aspect. And I'm so excited Henriette, that you actually have a book on that. We will have to discuss this, because the ultimate goal of our center is to educate policymakers and decision makers that the consequences of their short-term decisions really have not only a full life, but multi-generational implications, right? To share with them the weight of responsibility in what they choose to do. So I'm looking forward, both Felix and please, Henriette, to be in touch. And Omar, you also referred to that dimension when you spoke about memorials. That is it's a whole webinar in itself, isn't it? So I challenge all of you to plan the future webinars and simply write to me, and we create them together, right? And of course, Anneli, you are going to inspire many young people, and we must stay in touch. But anyone wants to, it's a very painful and serious issue that Violetta brought up, of the shame attached to, not to the perpetrators, but to the victims of rape. In many societies, not just Rwanda. Violetta, we will have a special webinar just on that. So, and you will most likely, hopefully, participate in it. But anyone wants to pick up on that question now, or let's leave it for an upcoming webinar.
No, you mean the shame of Dr. Daniel, the shame of rape?
The shame that is attached to the victim of rape. I was always very, very upset.
I think
by the fact that societies treat the victims.
It's a very good question.
Go ahead. But Omar, your eloquence has to go to 1 minute. Go ahead.
I was going to say that it's a very good question. First of all, we need to look at the aspect of culture, and we need to look at the aspect of psychology, psychotherapy, and the aspect of healing. Women, first of all, genocide to happen, it starts with dehumanization. And the women were dehumanized through all propaganda materials, but more specifically, 10 Hutu Commandment. When you take 10 Hutu Commandment, it's about commodifying a woman, a Tutsi woman. And
let's stop here, because it really does deserve a whole webinar. So let's pretend like
I was going to say that we need a safe space.
We will learn from you, not to worry. I just don't want us to behave as if it's a question to be answered in 2 minutes, because it's such a hugely upsetting cultural maltreatment of women, mostly, but certainly of raped men. Go ahead, Claver, if you want to.
I want to bring in another perspective when we talk about rape. Rape was intentionally used during the genocide.
Exactly.
As a weapon
We called
of destruction.
it the second genocide. Exactly.
Exactly. Because perpetrators knew that inflicting too much pain on victims was going to have a long impact even when they survive. So pretty much in the eyes of perpetrators, rape victims stand as dead living people. And it stays for these victims to stand up and be resilient, which is not easy unless we have strong supporting systems that goes into rebuilding their psychology, their self-esteem, and also supporting them financially to regain a decent life. So as you say, we can have another webinar on that, but I just wanted to point out that this was intentionally done.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. And I remember very vividly, it was called the second genocide. It was also part of transmitting AIDS. It was absolutely cruel. Anyway, it was horrible. Yeah, so we are out of time, but and we did not answer many of the questions, and the richness of this panel humbles all of us. But I would like you to take a deep breath, and maybe what would be your last word to this extremely engaged audience and grateful audience? What would you like? Carissa, would you like to be the first one? Because you've been the last one until now. Take your time, don't rush.
Yes, thank you very much. It won't be more than thank you. It won't be more than a thank you word for everyone here, but also to emphasize that the transmission of legacy, the transmission of memory will require everyone's effort, not only the parents, but also the young generation, to educate themselves, to go beyond their burdens, their traumas, and their family's trauma, to always rebound and bounce back from their burdens, and we build the life we want to live in.
Thank you. And okay, Claveria, please, we are going backward.
My thanks go to everybody who was online and to you who moderated the webinar. But let me let me launch a call to action. We've shared what we had to share. People listened, people learned, but let us remember that no one is born a perpetrator. Hate is taught, and so love should also be taught if we are to raise the next generation to become tolerant and foster peaceful cohabitation. So let us all strive to, to build compassionate people, the young generation, and let us all live a purposeful life where we recognize that in our diversity, we can emerge united and strong. Thank you.
Thank you. And the mom, Henrietta.
I just wanted to say this, if there is anybody in the audience who are dealing with trauma or depression, if there's anybody who has a child or a family members who are going through depression, I wanted to say this, not to scare you. Trauma is real. It's real, but also there is a way out. Don't be ashamed for talking about your feelings to somebody who is a specialist or even a family member so that they can know where you stand emotionally. Seek for a help every time. If you feel you are in those down moments, it's okay. It's okay to feel what you feel and know that somebody somewhere is listening and somebody somewhere can hear you. I've talked to a friend of mine who is a survivor of genocide, and she told me that when she's sharing her pain with the husband, the children, that they never because happens really deep. She thinks they don't listen to me. I'm like, they do listen to you. So guys, we are listening to you. Your family members are listening to you. They know your pain. They know what you went through. Always share. Always tell them how you feel and what you're going through. And I also wanted to invite all of you to the Voice of Resilience conference in August, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. This is a conference for survivors of genocide and their children. We're going to have 3 days together. We're going to talk, we're going to share. It's a safe place for us and our children. And we invited everybody from all over the world. Free to attend, please come. Dr. Danielle is going to be there. Jacqueline is going to be there. Omar, everybody you see is going to be there. So we can't wait to see you guys in Houston, Texas, and invite friends. Thank
That
you.
would be wonderful, yes, indeed. And Jacqueline, Jacqueline put the link on the chat as to how to register.
Yes.
I look forward to giving you a hug in person.
Oh, thank you. That would mean a lot. So thank you. This is amazing. There is not always enough time. I feel we can go on and go on and go on and talk. It's very important that we start doing this more often.
And last but not least, and first, Omar.
Thank you very
Your
much.
last word.
I think I wish I could say thank you enough, but thank you very much for Dr. Danielle and Jacqueline and your team. Through, the whole work that has been done to make sure that today's panel is very successful. I want to thank my colleagues, Akaliza Mtegwarava and Irakoze, for their wonderful insight. I learned also from them. And I want to thank everyone in the audience who was very engaging, the messages, but also because, the courage, it was a very lively and engaging conversation. Thank you to everyone. And I and my friend Gabby Cohen, we are publishing a book soon. It's going to be a fictional book. It's called The Manga Massacre, or Among the Sogam. Hopefully, it will also contribute, it will be an additional contribution to the work Clavel is doing, because it's also dedicated to children as well. So otherwise, let's hope that today's, probably we shared something that was useful and insightful to anyone that we learned. I talked about memorials. I keep advocating for visiting memorials. I keep advocating for writing about memorials, because as Vedas Tingarambe, an architect who built the Bisesero Genocide Memorial, said, a memorial should tell a story, but we should then listen to that story and perpetuate that story, because it is through listening and understanding that we shall heal. Clavel said it takes a village to educate, but I think it also takes a community to heal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And, we have at least two kinds of webinars. One that goes into depth about inside the group itself, like this one. The other is intergroup. It's how the wisdom of one group contributes to another, right? So we will have the next one, we will have on rape, indeed. It will be in our reparative justice series.
Mhm.
The reparative justice series attempts to teach, educate, train people in the justice system how to listen to survivors without traumatizing them, how to speak to them without traumatizing the survivors as witnesses, and also to teach them how to protect themselves and integrate what they hear without it being traumatizing to themselves. Because when they are traumatized, they cannot listen, and therefore they cannot do the work. I hope what I said was clear. But you'll hear it again and again and again. So I don't have enough words to thank you. Just the wisdom from this webinar will shine light on and on. And I can't wait to see you in Houston, Texas.
Houston, yes.
Mwah. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.